Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and wondered what pain they've carried alone, hidden from the world in the rugged heart of the Arizona Territory? A schoolteacher named Penelope made a choice that would forever change her life. She married Zachary Blackwood, the cowboy nobody dared to touch. The townsfolk whispered about him, his silence, his scars, the way he never took his shirt off, and Penelope began to wonder what secrets her husband was hiding beneath the surface. Imagine being her, a new bride in a harsh land, standing beside a man feared by everyone else. Would you turn away, protecting your own safety, or would you stay and try to uncover the truth he had buried in silence as fires raged, enemies circled, and long-buried wounds came to light? Penelope faced the ultimate question: could love heal a man scarred by both war and betrayal? Or would those scars consume them both? This is a story not only of frontier hardship, but of courage, trust, and the power of love to reach beyond fear. Stay with us as we begin this unforgettable journey. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story of the frontier heart. The first shot cut through the chatter of the saloon like a blade. The second forced Clara Whitmore to dive behind an overturned table, her chest tight beneath her corset as smoke and the sting of cheap whiskey filled the air. This was not at all how she had pictured her first day in Red Hawk. The New Mexico Territory pressed in on her from every side as she crouched behind splintered wood. Bullets tore overhead while curses rang out, words rougher than anything she had heard back on her father's ranch. "Stay down, miss," a voice ordered firmly. A strong hand pressed her shoulder, pushing her lower to the ground. These fellas ain't joking around. Clara looked up at her rescuer, a young cowhand, barely more than a boy, with nervous eyes and shaking hands. His voice cracked when he whispered, "It's him, Jameson Cross." The very name seemed to steal the air from the room. Outside, boots scraped against the boardwalk. Another shot split the silence, and a man cried out in pain. Then came a hush so heavy it made Clara's skin prickle. "Who is Jameson Cross?" she managed to whisper. The boy's face went pale. "The devil himself, ma'am. Best you pray you never get in his way." It was September of 1878. Clara had stepped off the stagecoach into Red Hawk that very morning, carrying nothing but $20, a trunk of belongings, and her father's old pocket watch. At 22, she had already buried both her parents, her mother taken by illness, her father by grief, and seen creditors strip away their Nebraska ranch. With no family left, she had answered a newspaper ad calling for teachers in frontier towns. Now, on her very first day, she was huddled on the filthy floor of Red Hawk's lone saloon, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. The swinging doors burst open. Heavy boots crossed the threshold, each step deliberate, each one dragging the room tighter with dread. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. "Dempy," a deep voice drawled, calm and unhurried. "I believe you've got something that belongs to me." From her hiding place, Clara could see only boots dusted from the trail, worn denim, and gun belts slung low across lean hips. A long, black coat brushed the floor as he walked. "I swear, Cross, I didn't know they were your cattle," a man stammered from across the room. "I'll pay you double what I got for 'em." "It ain't about money," the stranger said, his voice low and even. "It's about principle." Another shot cracked. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Clara flinched, eyes shut tight. "The next one," the man warned, "goes between your eyes. You've got until sundown tomorrow to bring back what's mine. with interest, or I'll return and I won't be nearly so polite." The boots turned toward the door, but as they passed Clara's hiding place, they stopped. She held her breath. "Ma'am," the voice softened. "You'd best find a safer place than this to wait for whatever it is you're waiting on." Clara dared to lift her eyes. Jameson Cross stood above her, no older than 30, with the kind of face carved from stone-sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shaded with stubble, eyes the color of gathering storm clouds. A wide-brimmed hat threw shadows across his features, but not enough to hide the white scar that cut from temple to mouth. What unsettled her most was not his striking appearance, but the emptiness in his gaze. He looked at her as one might glance at an insect, curious, but distant. "Welcome to Red Hawk," he said, tipping his hat before stepping back into the night. The saloon stayed frozen long after he left. Then, like floodgates breaking, voices rose in frantic whispers. The young cowhand Eli Turner helped Clara to her feet. "You all right, Miss?" "Yes." "Thank you," she murmured, brushing dust from her skirt. Who was that man, she asked. That there was Jameson Cross, owns Ironwood Ranch, biggest spread north of town, mean as a rattler, quicker than one, too. Folks with sense give him a wide berth. The barkeep approached then, his weathered face lined with sympathy. "You must be the new schoolteacher. Sheriff was supposed to meet you, but he got called out to the Dalton place. Horse thieves." He held out his hand. "Sam Harlan. I run this place. Clara Whitmore," she replied, shaking it. "And yes, I'm the new teacher." "Well, Miss Whitmore," Sam said, "this ain't much of a welcome. I'll grant you that. Let me get you some water before I walk you over to the boarding house." As she drank, Sam leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Cross came here about 5 years back. No one knows from where. Bought the old Hawthorne spread and turned it into the Ironwood. Keeps to himself, mostly, but cross him, and God help you." Clara listened, unsettled. Sam went on, polishing a glass as though to steady his own nerves. "Strange fellow. Never sheds that black coat, even in summer. Some say he's hiding something. Others say he's running from someone. Whatever the truth, he's dangerous but fair. Never kills without warning. Never takes more than what's owed." "That's meant to be reassuring," Clara asked faintly. Sam gave a small shrug. "This is the frontier, Miss Whitmore. Standards are different out here. And with that, Clara Whitmore's new life in Red Hawk had begun under the shadow of a man and the whole territory feared. Margaret O'Donnell was a stout woman in her 50s with a sharp tongue and a shrewd pair of eyes that missed very little. She welcomed Clara Whitmore into her boarding house with a kind of brisk efficiency that, after the chaos of Clara's arrival in Red Hawk, felt like a blessing. "The rules here are simple," Margaret said as she led her upstairs to a narrow but tidy room on the second floor. "No gentlemen callers in the rooms, no liquor under my roof. Breakfast at 6 sharp, supper at 6. You're welcome to use the kitchen at midday, but clean up after yourself. Wash day's Saturday." Clara nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. O'Donnell. This is lovely." The older woman's face softened. "It isn't much, but it's safe. You can see the schoolhouse bell from that window there. It's only 2 streets away." Once Margaret had gone, Clara sank onto the small bed and finally allowed the tears she had been holding back to fall. Everything she had known was gone: her parents, their Nebraska ranch, the life she had once thought would stretch on forever. And now, here she was, in a dusty town where men shot at each other in broad daylight, where everyone whispered in fear about a man named Jameson Cross. She pulled her father's pocket watch from her trunk, running her thumb over the dented silver. "What have I gotten myself into?" "Papa," she whispered into the empty room. The next morning, she rose early, determined to make a good first impression. She pinned her blonde hair into a neat bun, chose her best skirt and shirtwaist, and stepped into the smell of coffee and frying bacon. At the long breakfast table sat 3 other boarders: Henry Cobb, the telegraph operator, Lydia Harper, the town's seamstress, and Dr. William Carver, the physician. They greeted her politely, their curiosity plain. "Word is you had quite the introduction to Red Hawk yesterday," Dr. Carver remarked, handing her a plate of biscuits. He was a man near 50, with kindly eyes and a beard touched with gray. Clara managed a small smile. "News does travel quickly. In a place this size, gossips about all the entertainment we have," Lydia Harper said brightly. She was close to Clara's age, dark-haired with a lively intelligence in her eyes. That, and trying to guess what Jameson Cross keeps hidden under that long coat of his. "Lydia," Margaret O'Donnell scolded as she came in with a fresh pot of coffee. "Well, it's true," Lydia pressed on. "No man wears a duster all year unless he's hiding something. I've offered to sew him shirts plenty of times, and he won't take them. Perhaps he's modest, or perhaps," she added with a grin, "he's covered in tattoos from a prison stretch, or scars from a knife fight." "That's enough breakfast speculation," Margaret said firmly. "Miss Whitmore's got her first day ahead of her, and she doesn't need her head filled with tall tales." Clara thanked her silently, though the seed of curiosity had already been planted. What was Cross hiding, and why did the town speak of him with equal parts fear and fascination? The Red Hawk schoolhouse was a small one-room structure with rows of desks, a potbelly stove, and a blackboard that had seen better days. 27 children filled the benches, ranging in age from 6 to 16. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity, shyness, and, for a handful of older boys, mischief. "Good morning," Clara began, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "My name is Miss Whitmore, and I'll be your new teacher." A freckle-faced boy in the back raised his hand. "Miss Whitmore, is it true you were in the saloon when Jameson Cross shot it up yesterday?" Several children gasped. Clara drew a careful breath. "First, Mr. Cross did not shoot up the saloon. He fired a warning shot. Second, that is hardly the sort of subject fit for school. Now, let's begin with roll call." The day swept by in a whirl of lessons, small triumphs, and the endless work of keeping so many ages and levels in order. By the time the final bell rang, Clara was weary to the bone, but also proud. Despite the rocky start, she had found her footing. Some of the children had even smiled at her as they left, which she took as a victory. She was locking the door when a tall man approached, hat in hand. His mustache was streaked with gray, his face lined by the sun and years of hard living. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted. "Sheriff Elias Boone. Sorry I didn't meet you yesterday. Had trouble out at the Dalton homestead. Horses stolen." "So I heard," Clara replied, slipping the key into her pocket. Would have been back in time. Boone continued, but then Cross decided to make an appearance at the saloon. He shook his head. "Between you and me, I don't mind missing that standoff." Clara hesitated. "Is he truly as dangerous as folks say?" The sheriff considered this. "Jameson Cross is complicated. Dangerous, yes, but he's no mindless killer. He's got a code, though no one knows it till they've crossed him. That's the trouble. He gestured to the road. Let me walk you back. Might as well fill you in on the lay of the land. As they strolled down the main street, he pointed out the general store, the doctor's office, and the white-steepled church where services were held only twice a month, when the traveling preacher made his rounds. This town is split clean in two, Boone explained. Merchants and townsfolk on one side, ranchers on the other. Cross runs the biggest spread ironwood ranch, but he keeps clear of politics. Then you've got the mining company west of here, buying up land and bringing in rough men to do their bidding. Clara frowned. It all sounds terribly divided. The sheriff gave a low chuckle. The frontier's always divided, Miss Whitmore. People come out here chasing something or running from it. Every man and woman has a story, but most won't tell it. Clara nodded, though her thoughts lingered on one man in particular. A man wrapped in black, with storm-gray eyes and a scar across his face. Jameson Cross. The sheriff's words lingered in Clara Whitmore's thoughts as September gave way to October. Slowly, she began finding her rhythm in Red Hawk. The schoolhouse, once intimidating, became a place of warmth and laughter. She grew fond of her students, particularly little Anna McKinley, a bright-eyed girl with a gift for mathematics well beyond her years, and Benji Carter, who stumbled through his reading but could recite tales of American history with startling precision. There were the challenging ones, too, such as Noah Briggs, a restless boy whose mischief often tested her patience. Yet even Noah had his moments of surprising tenderness that reminded Clara why she had chosen this work. Outside the classroom, she began to carve a life for herself. Lydia Harper, the seamstress whose shop sat just off the main street, invited Clara for tea one Sunday afternoon. The room above the sewing shop was modest, smelling faintly of muslin and lavender, but filled with Lydia's warmth. "You've settled well," Lydia remarked, pouring tea into chipped china cups. "The children adore you." Clara smiled faintly. "They're wonderful, every last one, even the difficult ones. You mean Noah Briggs?" Lydia laughed. "That boy will be the death of his poor mother." They sipped their tea, chatting about the latest news from the stagecoach out of St. Louis, the price of calico, and the preacher's upcoming visit. But inevitably, the conversation turned to Jameson Cross. "Has he been back in town since the saloon incident?" Clara asked, trying to sound casual. "Once," Lydia replied, lowering her voice. "He came into the general store, bought supplies, left without a word. But yesterday, something curious happened. His foreman, Thomas Grady, stopped by here." Lydia leaned forward, her eyes alight with mischief. "He ordered fabric for new curtains at the ranch house." "That doesn't seem unusual," Clara said, though her curiosity stirred. "Except Cross has lived at Ironwood Ranch 5 years without caring one whit about curtains. And Thomas mentioned they're fixing up rooms that have been closed since he bought the place, including the old nursery." Clara nearly spilled her tea. "You think he's planning for a family? I think something's shifted," Lydia said with a sly grin. "Maybe he's courting someone, though heaven knows who would have him. Or perhaps he's expecting company." She sighed. "Whatever the reason, I wish he'd let me make him a decent shirt. A man with looks like his ought not to hide under that black coat forever." Clara forced a laugh, but she could not push Jameson Cross from her mind. She told herself it was only natural curiosity, yet she found herself recalling the storm-gray eyes that had locked on hers in the saloon, the quiet authority in his voice, and, most confusing of all, the unexpected gentleness when he had warned her to find safer company. By mid-October, cooler winds swept down from the hills, carrying with them the promise of winter. Red Hawk came alive with preparations for the annual Harvest Festival. The school children practiced their recitations, the women baked pies and roasted meats, and lanterns were strung along the town square. On the day of the festival, Clara stood with her pupils near the bandstand, helping them line up for their readings. The air smelled of roasted corn and wood smoke, but the cheerful murmur of the crowd faltered into silence. Jameson Cross had appeared at the edge of the square. He wore the same black duster despite the pleasant weather. At his side stood Thomas Grady and two ranch hands. Their uncertain stances betrayed that they had not expected such a reception. Sheriff Elias Boone approached, his hand carefully clear of his revolver. Cross. Boone greeted with a curt nod. "Didn't figure you for the festival. We brought beef for the barbecue," Cross replied evenly, gesturing to the wagon behind him, piled high with meat. The men wanted to join the celebration. The sheriff blinked, surprised. "That's generous of you." Cross's face betrayed no emotion. "We're part of this community, Sheriff, whether folk care to admit it or not." The words fell like stones in the hush, yet slowly the tension bled away. The ranch hands moved toward the food tables. Men hurried to unload the wagon, and conversation resumed in cautious bursts. Still, Cross remained on the outskirts, his storm cloud eyes scanning the square. Clara forced herself to return to her students, though she felt the weight of his gaze more than once. Each time she looked up, she caught him watching her, only for him to look away. As night descended, lanterns flickered around the square, the fiddlers struck up a lively tune, and couples began to fill the cleared space before the bandstand. Clara stood to one side with Margaret O'Donnell and Dr. William Carver, politely declining invitations to dance. She was just turning to remark on the music when a deep voice startled her. "Miss Whitmore." She spun to find Jameson Cross before her. Up close, she saw how the lamplight revealed faint blue flecks in his gray eyes, how the dark hair curled slightly where it brushed his collar. "Mr. Cross," she answered, her voice steady though her heart quickened. "Would you honor me with a dance?" He extended a gloved hand. For a moment she could only stare. Beside her, Margaret O'Donnell gasped softly. Dr. Carver studied his punch cup as though it contained the secrets of the universe. "Yes," Clara managed at last, placing her hand in his. The square seemed to fall silent as he led her onto the dance floor. Every eye turned toward them. If Cross noticed, he gave no sign. He placed his hand at her waist, holding her at a proper distance, and began a waltz with surprising skill. "You dance well, Mr. Cross," she said, struggling to reconcile this poised partner with the man who had once threatened another with a bullet between the eyes. "West Point," he said simply. "They teach more than tactics there." Her brows rose. "You were in the Army a lifetime ago." A shadow crossed his expression. They moved together in silence for several beats until he asked quietly, "How are you finding Red Hawk?" "It grows on me," Clara admitted. "The children are wonderful. The people, for the most part, have been kind, even if my first day was less than welcoming." For the first time she saw a faint tug at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of a smile. First impressions can be misleading. She met his gaze, holding it. "For instance, you're nothing like the devil people describe." The smile vanished, his eyes darkened, storm clouds gathering. Don't be too sure of that. Miss Whitmore. The song ended. Cross bowed slightly, returned her to Margaret's side, and disappeared back into the crowd. Clara stood very still, her heart thundering. She did not know whether to feel exhilarated or afraid. Jameson Cross vanished into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared, and a short while later Clara Whitmore caught sight of him and his men riding out of Red Hawk beneath the harvest moon. "Well, I never," Margaret O'Donnell murmured, pressing a hand to her chest. "Jameson Cross dancing in public. And with our new schoolteacher no less," Dr. William Carver added, casting Clara a glance that carried more questions than words. Clara felt the heat rise to her cheeks. "It was only a dance," she said softly. But even as she spoke, she knew it had been more than that. Something had shifted. A fragile thread of connection had formed, and judging by the whispers that trailed her long after the music stopped, the whole town had taken notice. The next morning, Clara was jolted awake by a frantic pounding at her door. She opened it to find Margaret O'Donnell still in her nightclothes, her hair hastily pinned and her eyes wide with alarm. "What is it?" Clara gasped. "The schoolhouse," Margaret said breathlessly. "There's been a fire. Sheriff Boone sent word it's out now, but he thought you should know." Clara threw on her dress and hurried across town, her heart hammering in her chest. Smoke still lingered in the crisp morning air when she arrived. One side of the little building was blackened, a window shattered into glittering shards across the dirt. Sheriff Elias Boone and a handful of townsmen were inspecting the damage. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore," Boone said gravely. He held up the remains of a kerosene lamp, its glass scorched and broken. "This wasn't an accident. Someone tossed this through the window." Clara's stomach dropped. "You mean someone set it on purpose? But why, who would burn a school?" The sheriff exchanged a long look with the men around him before speaking. "Word is, Cross showed an interest in you at the festival. That sort of attention can rattle people. He's got enemies, Miss Whitmore, and there are those who won't hesitate to make a point." "That's ridiculous," Clara protested. "It was one dance. In some minds, that's more than enough," Dr. Carver said, stepping forward. His voice was kind but solemn. "Cross carries enemies like shadows, and if they believe you're under his protection, they may come after you too." "I'm not under anyone's protection," Clara insisted. "I hardly know the man." "Even so," the sheriff said gently, laying a hand on her shoulder, "it might be wise to keep your guard up. Until the school can be repaired, you'll be teaching from the church. Stay close to town. It would take 2 weeks before repairs could begin. In the meantime, lessons were shifted to the church hall, leaving Clara with more idle hours than she cared for. She used the time to visit her students' families, walking or riding out to farms and homesteads to better understand the lives of those in her charge. One cool afternoon, she traveled 5 miles out to the McKinley farm. She was helping Mrs. McKinley hang laundry while Anna chattered about her growing rock collection when the thud of approaching hooves broke the quiet. Jameson Cross rode at the head of several men from Ironwood Ranch. Their horses slowed when they spotted Clara standing in the yard. Cross touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Whitmore," he said evenly. "Didn't expect to find you out here." "I'm visiting my pupils while the schoolhouse is mended," she replied, her voice cooler than she felt. Something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps, or irritation. "I heard about the fire. Fortunate someone discovered it before the whole place went up. There was an edge to his words she couldn't place. But before she could ask, Mrs. McKinley bustled forward, insisting the men stay for coffee. Cross began to decline, but the farmer's wife would not hear of it. With a resigned nod, he dismounted. While the ranch hands chatted with Mr. McKinley, Cross stood apart, silent and watchful. Anna, undaunted by his reputation, trotted up to him with her little box of rocks. "Mr. Cross, want to see my collection? Miss Whitmore says this one might be a fossil." To Clara's astonishment, Cross crouched down to the child's height, taking the stones with careful hands. "That does look like a fossil," he said, his voice softer. He lifted another. "And this jasper. My father once told me it was prized for arrowheads." Anna's eyes shone. "You know about rocks a little," he admitted. "My father studied geology." The admission startled Clara. She edged closer, curious for more, but his glance flicked up to meet hers with a guarded expression before he returned his attention to the girl. When it came time to leave, Clara found herself walking beside him to his horse. "You're good with children," she said quietly. "Anna isn't usually so open with strangers. Children judge better than grown folk," he answered. "They see without fear or malice." His voice carried a trace of bitterness. "Is that why everyone fears you, Mr. Cross?" she asked gently. "Because they don't understand you." He stopped, turning to face her. For a heartbeat she glimpsed something vulnerable in his eyes. Then it was gone. "They fear me because I've given them cause to, and so should you." "You haven't given me any reason to fear you," she countered. "Not yet." He mounted his horse, his expression cold again. "But if you're wise, you'll keep your distance. That fire wasn't coincidence." Before she could answer, he spurred his horse and rejoined his men. Clara stood in the dust, her mind whirling. That evening, Lydia Harper joined her for supper at the boarding house. Clara recounted the encounter in a low voice, still unsettled. "He warned you away." Lydia's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "That's something." "What do you mean?" Clara asked. "Men who relish their reputation don't usually push away women who draw near, especially not women like you. If he wanted you to fear him, he'd have let you get closer first." Clara looked down at her plate, troubled and uncertain. Jameson Cross was a riddle she could not yet solve. Lydia Harper tapped her fork thoughtfully against her plate as she and Clara finished their supper. "It's almost as if he's trying to shield you from something," the seamstress remarked. "Or from someone," Clara mused, recalling Sheriff Boone's warning that Jameson Cross carried dangerous enemies. The next afternoon, Clara stepped into Boyd's General Store to purchase supplies for her temporary classroom at the church. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, the warmth of the stove wrapping around her. She was halfway down the aisle, gathering pencils and slates, when the door swung open again. A gust of cold air swept in along with three rough-looking men. Samuel Boyd stiffened visibly behind the counter. "Gentlemen," he greeted cautiously, "what can I do for you today?" The tallest of the group, a broad-shouldered man with a pock-marked face and calculating eyes, smiled in a way that held no warmth. "Just browsing." "Boyd, don't mind us." Clara kept her eyes lowered, hoping to avoid attention, but she could feel their stares like needles in her back. Well, the leader said, sauntering toward her. "You must be the new schoolteacher. Preston's been talking about you." He extended a hand. "Fletcher Kane. I represent the Western Mining Syndicate." Clara forced herself to shake his hand briefly. Clara Whitmore, if you'll excuse me, I have shopping to finish. But when she tried to step past, Kane shifted to block her way. No need to rush. We're neighbors of a sort. Our operation's just west of town. How very nice, Clara replied tightly, trying again to move around him. Kane leaned closer, his smile fading. Word is, you've caught Jameson Cross's eye. That's a dangerous position for a woman to be in. I don't see how my acquaintances concern you. Mr. Kane, she said firmly. His eyes hardened. Everything in this valley concerns me, especially when it involves Jameson Cross. That man's standing in the way of progress, and folks who side with him often regret it. The implication was clear. Clara drew herself up, spine straight. Are you admitting to burning down the schoolhouse, Mr. Kane? For a brief second, his eyes widened before narrowing again. That's a bold accusation. Miss Whitmore, you'd best be careful about spreading lies. He tipped his hat. Good day. I'm sure we'll speak again soon. When the men left, Samuel Boyd hurried to her side. Are you all right? Miss Whitmore Fletcher Kane's not a man to tangle with. So I gathered, Clara replied, her fingers trembling as she counted out coins for her purchases. What does he have against Mr. Cross Boyd lowered his voice. The syndicate wants to divert the river to fuel their mine. If they succeed, Ironwood Ranch won't have enough water for cattle. Cross has been fighting them through lawyers and other means. Kane doesn't take kindly to resistance. You think he had the school torched to send Cross a message. Boyd's jaw tightened. I think you'd be wise not to get caught between two men like that. Cross and Kane are both dangerous in their own ways. The warning echoed in Clara's mind as she walked back to the boarding house. She had come to Red Hawk seeking peace, a place to start over after her losses. Instead, she had stepped straight into a storm she barely understood. That night, the storm outside was as fierce as the one within her. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled over the valley, and the boarding house shuddered under the wind. Clara sat by her window, restless, watching the rain streak down the glass. A sudden knock at the front door startled her. She heard Margaret O'Donnell's footsteps in the hall, followed by muffled voices, one of them unmistakably Jameson Cross's. Clara crept to her door, opening it a crack to listen. She needs to know, Cross was saying, his voice urgent. Kane's men were seen watching the boarding house this evening. At this hour, Margaret protested. Surely it can wait until morning. It can't. His words were cut off by the sharp crash of breaking glass from the kitchen. Margaret screamed. Clara raced downstairs to find her landlady backing away from the kitchen door. A brick lay on the floor amid shards of glass. Cross bent, retrieving it. A scrap of paper was tied to it. His face darkened as he read. Without a word, he handed it to Clara. Her stomach turned cold as she read aloud. Next time it won't be a brick, Margaret gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Sweet heaven, what now? It means Kane is escalating, Cross said grimly, and you're in danger. Miss Whitmore. She can't stay here, he added flatly. This place is too exposed. She comes with me to Ironwood Ranch. Absolutely not, Clara exclaimed. I hardly know you, Mr. Cross. I will not be carted off to your ranch in the middle of the night. His jaw tightened. Would you prefer to wait until Kane's men return with kerosene instead of a brick? I'll go to Sheriff Boone, she countered. Boone's out at the Dalton homestead tonight. Convenient, isn't it? Cross's gaze locked on hers. Miss Whitmore, I know you don't trust me, but this isn't a request. At Ironwood, I can keep you safe. Here, you're vulnerable." Margaret touched Clara's arm. "Perhaps he's right. Dear, just until the sheriff returns." Then she turned to Cross with a stern look. "And I'll be coming with her." A flicker of relief passed over his face. Of course, I'd expect nothing less. And so, while the storm raged, Clara found herself in a covered wagon beside Margaret O'Donnell, headed toward the notorious Ironwood Ranch. Cross rode close, his posture taut, one hand never far from the revolver at his hip. The main house loomed larger than Clara had imagined, a two-story structure of stone and heavy timber, its porch lit with lanterns despite the late hour. Warm light spilled from the windows, casting a glow that stood in sharp contrast to the dark night. As they pulled up, several ranch hands hurried forward, taking the reins and helping the women down. Clara stood in the rain-damp air, staring at the place that had been whispered about since the day she arrived in Red Hawk. For the first time, she was about to step inside the private world of Jameson Cross. Thomas Grady, the ranch foreman, met them at the door of Ironwood Ranch. "Rooms are ready. Boss, Nora's got hot coffee and stew waiting." Jameson Cross gave him a curt nod. "Thank you, Thomas. Post extra men on watch tonight, just to be sure." Inside, Clara was surprised by the comfort of the home. She had expected bare walls and rough furniture, but instead found sturdy pieces softened by handmade rugs, polished floors, and the warm glow of a great stone fireplace. The flames cast long shadows that danced across the beams overhead. Nora Ellis, the housekeeper, was brisk but kind as she ushered the damp travelers toward the hearth. "No sense catching cold," she said firmly. "Sit yourselves down. Food's ready." Bowls of steaming stew were set before them, the rich aroma making Clara realize just how hungry she was. They ate in silence for a moment before Jameson spoke. "Cain wants control of the Rio Verde," he said at last. "The East Fork runs through my land. Without it, his mines can't keep running at the pace he wants." Clara set down her spoon. Surely there are courts for that sort of matter. Jameson gave a humorless smile. "Cain doesn't waste time on judges when intimidation works faster. He's bribed officials, threatened ranchers, sabotaged herds, and now his gaze flicked to Clara. Now he thinks using you will give him leverage." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "That's absurd. We've barely spoken." "Doesn't matter," Jameson replied evenly. "Cain doesn't care about facts. He trades in appearances. And after the festival, folks believe you've caught my eye. That's all he needs." The way he said "caught my eye" sent a shiver down Clara's spine, though she quickly looked away. Before she could respond, Nora Ellis reappeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "Rooms are ready upstairs, fresh quilts, and flowers from the meadow. You'll be comfortable." The room assigned to Clara was unexpectedly charming. A four-poster bed draped with a handmade quilt, a desk near the window, and curtains that matched the bedspread gave it a home-like feel. A vase of wildflowers sat on the dresser, their faint fragrance filling the air. "This is lovely," Clara said softly, running her hand over the quilt. "Mr. Cross has been improving the house bit by bit," Nora said with a smile. "Said it was time the place looked like a proper home again." When the housekeeper left, Clara lingered by the window, staring out at the storm-soaked land. Somewhere out there, Fletcher Cain was scheming, and somehow she had been dragged into a battle she neither wanted nor understood. A knock broke her thoughts. Opening the door, she found Jameson standing in the hall, his long coat gone. He wore a dark shirt buttoned to the throat, a leather vest, and his ever-present gloves. Even stripped of his duster, he remained guarded, as if armor still clung to him. "I wanted to be sure you had everything you need," he said. "Yes, thank you. The room is more than I expected." He gave a short nod. "I'm glad." He hesitated, as if weighing words, then continued, his voice quieter. "Despite what Kane thinks, I never meant to put you in harm's way. Miss Whitmore—" "I know," Clara said gently, "but I don't understand why you're going to such lengths to keep me safe." For a long moment he was silent. Then he spoke. "Because no one else will stand against Kane. Because you came to Red Hawk to build something worth keeping, and you deserve the chance to do so." His eyes locked on hers, and for the first time she saw something beyond cold determination. There was a flicker of something more, something unspoken. "And because I cannot stand by while he threatens you." The words hung heavy in the air, full of meanings neither dared to name. Finally, Jameson stepped back. "Good night, Miss Whitmore. You're safe here. Mr. Cross," she called softly as he turned away. He paused. "Thank you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he disappeared down the corridor. That night, Clara slept better than she thought possible. Lulled by the steady patter of rain and the comfort of knowing armed men watched the ranch. Morning sunlight streamed through the window when she awoke, accompanied by the smell of bacon and coffee drifting upstairs, downstairs. Margaret O'Donnell was already seated at the breakfast table with Nora Ellis. Clara was told Jameson had ridden out at dawn to check the fence lines. "He rarely sleeps," Nora confided. "Been that way since he came here. Sometimes I hear him pacing the halls at all hours." "Has he always kept to himself?" Clara asked, keeping her tone casual. The housekeeper considered. "He's private, yes, but fair. Paid for Dr. Carver to tend Hank Willis's boy when the fever struck last winter. Bought a cow for the Prescott family when theirs died. He doesn't let folks close, but he does more good than he'll admit. Except with you," Margaret remarked, arching a brow. Nora chuckled softly. "I'm just the housekeeper. I cook his meals, keep the house. Beyond that, he's as much a mystery to me as to anyone." After breakfast, Nora offered to show them the ranch. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and clean, the grasslands shining under the autumn sun. The sweep of ironwood stretched for miles, rolling pastures, cattle grazing near the river, and the Rio Verde winding like a ribbon of blue through the land. "That's what Kane wants," Nora said grimly, pointing toward the water. "If he diverts it for his mine, it won't just cripple Ironwood. Every ranch downstream will suffer." As they walked back toward the main house, Clara noticed a small fenced enclosure off in the distance. "What's that place?" she asked. Nora's expression grew solemn. "That's the family cemetery. The Hawthorns are buried there, the family who owned this ranch before Mr. Cross. He never knew them, but he keeps it tended out of respect." Clara felt a tug of curiosity, her eyes drawn toward the simple white crosses standing against the horizon. For reasons she could not yet explain, the quiet place seemed to hold part of the mystery of Jameson Cross himself. Clara excused herself from the others and wandered toward the small cemetery she had glimpsed from the distance. Something about it drew her, perhaps the notion that a man as guarded as Jameson Cross had taken the time to care for a place so solemn. The graveyard was modest, a dozen or so headstones arranged neatly within a white fence. The center plot bore the names of the Hawthorne family, the previous owners of Ironwood Ranch, Jeremiah and Martha Hawthorne, their 3 children who had passed young, and an elderly relative were all laid to rest there. Clara's heart softened at the quiet dignity of the sight, but her gaze caught on a stone marker set a little apart. Its inscription was simple: Sarah Cross, beloved wife, 1848-1876. Clara's breath caught. Jameson Cross had been married. His wife was buried here, on land he had purchased only after her passing. Questions rushed into her mind, though she had no right to ask them. She died in the fire. Clara turned quickly. Jameson stood behind her, his face unreadable but shadowed by a pain that was carefully restrained. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. "You're not intruding," he replied. His gaze rested on the stone. "She would have liked you, I think. Sarah was a teacher too, back in Virginia." Clara kept quiet, sensing he needed to speak without interruption. "We were heading west." Jameson continued, voice low and far away, looking for a fresh start after the war. "In Kansas, we stopped for a night. Some men from the saloon men with old grudges followed us to the hotel. They set it on fire." Horror filled Clara's chest. How awful. I tried to reach her. His hands curled into fists at his sides. But the flames. By the time I got through, it was too late. Understanding struck Clara like a blow. "That's why you always keep yourself covered. You were burned that night." For the first time, his composure cracked. His eyes met hers in surprise. "You're perceptive, Miss Whitmore." "Is that why you've helped me?" Clara asked softly. "Because I remind you of her." He shook his head slowly. "No, you're nothing like Sarah. She was gentle, cautious. You—" A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You're braver than you should be." Warmth spread through Clara at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you for telling me about her. I haven't spoken of Sarah in years," he admitted, "but seeing you here, it seemed right somehow." They stood in silence, the autumn wind stirring the grass around the graves. At last, Jameson straightened, his manner shifting back to formality. "I sent word to Sheriff Boone. He's returned to Red Hawk and will ride out today to take our statements. Then I suppose I can return to town soon," Clara said, though the thought left her unsettled. "If that's what you wish," Jameson replied evenly. "But you'd be safer here until Kane is dealt with. I can't hide forever. Mr. Cross, my students are waiting. I came here to build a life, not to run from danger." His expression gave nothing away, but his voice softened. "You'll always be welcome at Ironwood, Miss Whitmore, for as long as you choose to stay." That afternoon, Sheriff Elias Boone arrived, his weathered face grim as he examined the brick and threatening note Jameson had saved from the boarding house. After hearing everyone's account, he sat at the long kitchen table with Jameson, Clara, and Margaret O'Donnell. "Kane's growing bolder," the sheriff said, "but proving he's behind this won't be simple. His men are loyal, and too many townsfolk depend on the mining syndicate for their livelihood. Few would dare testify. So he gets away with it," Clara asked in disbelief. "I didn't say that." Boone's tone was steady. "I'm gathering evidence, but these things take time. Meanwhile, Miss Whitmore remains in danger," Jameson pointed out. The sheriff exhaled heavily. "I can't post a deputy at the boarding house day and night. I simply don't have the men." "She could remain here," Jameson said firmly. "Ironwood is defensible. I have enough hands to keep her safe." The sheriff raised a brow. That would certainly send a message to Kane and stir up a storm of gossip in Red Hawk. I don't give a damn about gossip, Jameson replied. Well, I do, Clara interjected quickly. I'm the schoolteacher. I have a reputation to maintain. Margaret patted her hand with a knowing look. Dear, that reputation shifted the moment you walked into the Harvest Festival on Mr. Cross's arm. We danced once, Clara protested, which is once more than Mr. Cross has danced in 5 years, Sheriff Boone said dryly. People take note of such things. Jameson shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing the conversation would move on. What matters here is Miss Whitmore's safety, not idle chatter. Margaret leaned back thoughtfully, her eyes sharp. Perhaps there's a way to satisfy both safety and propriety. All eyes turned to her. If Clara were to stay here under more formal circumstances, Margaret said with deliberate calm, there would be no question of impropriety. The widow's lips curved into a small, pointed smile. I'm speaking of marriage, of course. Silence fell like a stone. Clara stared in stunned disbelief. Sheriff Boone sputtered on his coffee. Jameson Cross went utterly still, his face unreadable, though the tension in his jaw spoke volumes. That's absurd, Clara managed at last. We scarcely know one another. Marriages of convenience are not unusual out here, Margaret replied smoothly. Mr. Cross needs a wife to bring order to this house, and you need protection from Kane. It is a practical arrangement. Sheriff Boone rose to his feet, clearly uncomfortable. I think that's a matter best left for Miss Whitmore and Mr. Cross to consider privately. The room remained heavy with unspoken questions, none heavier than the one pounding in Clara's chest. Could she truly bind herself to a man as mysterious and scarred as Jameson Cross for safety, for survival, and perhaps for something more? After Sheriff Boone mounted his horse and rode back toward Red Hawk, the kitchen grew uncomfortably quiet. Margaret O'Donnell, sensing the tension, excused herself to help Nora Ellis with the laundry, leaving Clara and Jameson alone. Clara folded her hands on the table, her voice tight. I apologize for Margaret's suggestion. It was out of line. Jameson studied her with that steady, unreadable gaze. Was it marriage would settle more than one problem? Her eyes widened. You cannot be serious. I'm always serious, he replied evenly. I own the largest spread in the valley. As my wife, you would have protection, stability, and the resources to build the kind of school you've been dreaming of for your students. Clara's throat tightened. And what would you gain from such an arrangement? His gaze did not falter. An ally in this fight with Kane? Someone to bring life back into this house. And perhaps his voice dropped in time. Something more. Heat flared in her cheeks. The very idea was absurd marriage to a man she hardly knew. A man who kept himself hidden behind layers of cloth and silence. A man the whole town feared. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough, he countered. I know you're strong, clever, compassionate. I know you care for your students far beyond what duty requires. And I know you look at people as they are, not as the town gossips paint them. Clara rose abruptly, needing distance. This is too sudden. I need time. Jameson inclined his head. Take all the time you require, but understand Kane will not wait, nor will the gossip. Already tongues will wag about you spending nights at Ironwood, no matter the truth. The weight of his words sank into her. Her reputation as a schoolteacher was fragile. Whispers could turn into suspicions, and suspicions into parents withdrawing their children. And then there was the danger, real and looming. If she returned to the boarding house, she would not only endanger herself, but also Margaret and the other lodgers. Jameson seemed to read her thoughts. I'm not asking for a traditional marriage. You'd have your own space, your own pursuits. I'd expect nothing of you save your presence here and the occasional appearance as my wife in town. The words left her before she could stop them. And if I wanted more than that, for a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes' surprise, maybe hope before he pushed it down. Then we would speak of it, when you're ready. Clara inhaled sharply. I need to speak with Margaret. Of course. She found Margaret and Nora in the laundry room, folding crisp linens. When Clara explained Jameson's proposal, the two women exchanged a glance heavy with meaning. I suspected he might suggest such a thing. Margaret said, Jameson Cross is a man of practicality, and it is, indeed, a practical solution. Marriage, Clara burst out, to a man I barely know, a man who won't even show his face in town unless forced. Nora hung the last sheet on the line and turned to her. Mr. Cross is good at heart. Miss Whitmore, guarded, yes, wounded, certainly, but good where it matters most, and he plainly cares for you, Margaret added gently. I've never once seen him look at another soul the way he looks at you. Clara sank onto a stool, torn between duty and desire. I came to Red Hawk for independence, to carve a life of my own, not to be bound to someone else's. Who says you can't have both? Nora asked. Practical as ever. Ironwood is closer to town than some of your students' homes. You could still teach. And with Mr. Cross's support, you could build a school better than anything the council would ever provide. Margaret laid a hand on Clara's shoulder. Sometimes independence comes not from standing alone, but from choosing your own path, even when others don't understand it. By nightfall, Clara had made her decision. She found Jameson in his study, bent over ledgers in the glow of a lamp. He rose when she entered, his face carefully guarded, but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I'll marry you, she said plainly, but I have conditions. I expected no less. His mouth curved slightly. Name them. First, I will continue teaching. The ranch hands, children, and any who wish to come here until the town school is rebuilt. After that, I return to teaching in Red Hawk. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Second, I want honesty about this fight with Kane and the Rio Verde. No more keeping me in the dark for my protection. That's fair, Jameson said. Clara steadied herself before the hardest demand. And lastly, I want to see what you hide beneath your shirt. Not just the scars, but the truth behind them. If I'm to be your wife, even in name only, I should know what shadows I'm stepping into. Jameson froze, the air between them thick. Miss Whitmore. She held his gaze firmly. I won't be afraid. Jameson, whatever you conceal, it can't be worse than the stories I've imagined. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached for the buttons of his vest. His voice was quiet, almost reluctant. Not here. Come with me. He led her upstairs to what she assumed was his room. The space was large but stark, a four-poster bed dominating the center. A single lamp cast flickering shadows across the wooden floor. Close the door, he said. Clara did so, her heart hammering. Jameson removed his vest and laid it with care over a chair. His hands moved to the buttons of his shirt. Each movement was deliberate, like a ritual both dreaded and necessary. When the last button was undone, He stopped, clutching the fabric in his fists, as though he needed one more moment before revealing what lay beneath. "I haven't shown another living soul since the doctors back in Kansas," Jameson admitted, his voice ragged. "Not even Nora Ellis has seen." Clara suddenly faltered, regret pressing at her chest. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His tone left no room for argument. "If we're to build any kind of life together, you need to understand what you've agreed to." With that, he let the shirt fall open and slip from his shoulders. Clara's breath caught. In the glow of the lamp, the truth came into view. A map of scars stretched across his chest and shoulders, branching down one arm like angry rivers carved into his flesh. The fire had left its mark deep and merciless. "Now you know," he said flatly, "why I stay hidden, why I keep everyone at a distance." She stepped closer, eyes fixed on his face rather than his wounds. "You think these scars make you a monster," she said softly. "Something to fear or pity." A flicker of pain crossed his features. Clara shook her head. "But I see a survivor. A man who walked through fire for love. That isn't shame. Jameson, that's courage." Her hand hovered uncertainly above his chest. "May I?" He hesitated, then gave a slight nod. Her palm pressed gently against his scarred skin, feeling the rough edges, the uneven ridges, and beneath it all, the steady, unbroken rhythm of his heart. "These aren't marks of weakness," she whispered. "They're proof of what you endured, proof you loved deeply enough to risk everything." Something inside Jameson cracked then, a wall long fortified crumbling under her acceptance. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they weren't hollow, they carried pain still. Yes, but also warmth, and a spark of something he hadn't allowed himself in years. "Clara," he murmured, using her name for the first time. "Are you certain about this? If we marry, there will be no turning back." Her lips curved in a small, resolute smile. "I'm certain of one thing, that I want to stand with you against Cain. And I want to know the man behind the legend. The rest," she drew a breath, "the rest we'll discover together." 3 days later, their wedding was held in the parlor of Ironwood Ranch. Judge Harold Whitaker traveled from the county seat to officiate. Sheriff Boone, Margaret O'Donnell, Nora Ellis, and Thomas Grady served as witnesses. Clara wore a modest blue dress that Abigail Boyd had altered at the last minute when the news spread. Jameson, as always, dressed in black, though he donned a fresh shirt and vest for the occasion. The ceremony was simple, but weighty. When Judge Whitaker pronounced them husband and wife, Jameson lifted Clara's hand and pressed his lips gently against it. The gesture was more reverent than romantic, yet it stirred something inside her she hadn't expected. Word of the marriage spread through Red Hawk like wildfire. Some expressed shock, others disapproval, but none could deny its practicality. Clara Whitmore, the school teacher, gained safety and stability. Jameson Cross, the reclusive rancher, gained respectability and an ally in town. Fletcher Kane, on the other hand, was said to be livid. Reports reached Sheriff Boone that he had told his men, "This changes nothing. Ironwood's water rights will be mine with or without his new bride." Life at Ironwood fell into a rhythm Clara hadn't foreseen. She kept her promise, turning the wide dining room into a makeshift schoolhouse. Ranch hands' children sat beside youngsters from neighboring farms, all eager for lessons. Jameson himself cleared the space for her, insisting it was a worthy cause. In the evenings, she and Jameson shared meals, sometimes trading stories or debating books, other times simply sitting together in silence that was surprisingly comfortable. Their agreement to keep separate bedrooms held, yet every so often she caught him studying her with a look that made her wonder what more might grow between them. To her surprise, she found herself drawn more and more to the man hidden beneath the reputation. His fairness with the ranch hands, his quiet generosity toward struggling families, even his dry humor, all of it revealed layers the town of Red Hawk had never seen. 2 weeks after their wedding, Clara sat reading in the parlor when Jameson strode in, tension etched across his face. "What is it?" she asked quickly. "Kane's men were spotted near the north boundary," he said grimly. "They were measuring the Rio Verde's flow. Is that even legal?" "Not on Ironwood land," Jameson replied. He paced, jaw tight. "He's running out of patience. Investors in his mining company want water access by spring. If he can't buy it, he'll try something desperate." Clara rose. "Then what do we do?" He gave her a look, one of quiet appreciation for the way she included herself in the fight. "I've filed injunctions, hired lawyers, but Kane doesn't play by rules. I fear he's planning something drastic," almost as if his words conjured it. The door burst open. A ranch hand stumbled inside, eyes wide. "Fire. Boss." The north pastures burning, Jameson was already moving. He snatched his hat and gun belt. "Get the men, bring water wagons, send riders to warn the neighbors." Clara rushed after him. "Let me help," he spun. "Fierce. Stay here. If this is Kane's doing, he might have men waiting to strike elsewhere while we're distracted." Before she could protest, he was gone, galloping toward the blaze that glowed orange against the night sky. Hours dragged by with no word. Clara paced the floor, nerves fraying. Nora brewed strong coffee and laid out food for the men who would stagger back exhausted if they came back at all. "They'll be all right," Nora said firmly. "Mr. Cross knows how to fight fire." Clara nodded, but her heart would not calm. She stood at the window, eyes fixed on the horizon where flames licked the dark sky, praying that the man she had just vowed her life to would return to her whole. Nora's words of reassurance lingered in Clara's mind, though they only reminded her of the scars her husband carried. Jameson Cross had survived fire before fire that had taken more than land or fences. It had taken the woman he once loved and left him with wounds that never truly healed. It was well past midnight when the riders returned. Their boots were heavy, their clothes streaked with soot and ash. Faces, grim and drawn, told the story before a word was spoken. Jameson came in last, his tall frame dusted black, his hat in hand, his jaw set like iron. Clara moved forward, pressing a tin cup of hot coffee into his hand. How bad! His voice was rough, scraped raw by smoke. "We managed to contain it before it reached the Rio Verde or the barns, lost about 50 acres of grazing land and some fencing." Her heart sank, and Kane, his eyes shadowed beneath the lamplight, hardened like stone. One of his men was spotted watching from the ridge, claimed he was just passing through. Convenient story. Without thinking, Clara reached for his hand. It was rough with calluses, streaked black from ash, but she held it anyway. "You don't have to face this alone. Not tonight." He studied her face, as if weighing whether to accept what she offered. "Clara, we agreed. I'm not suggesting we break our arrangement," she interrupted gently. "Just maybe tonight you'll rest easier with someone nearby, someone to chase the nightmares away." For a moment, his expression softened. Gratitude flickered in his eyes. He gave her hand a quiet squeeze. "Thank you," that night. Clara pulled a chair to his bedside. Jameson fell into an exhausted sleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. She stayed awake, reading by lamplight, the quiet rustle of pages filling the silence, when his sleep turned restless, when fire returned to haunt him. She leaned close, waking him with a touch, whispering steady words that pulled him back. By dawn, something had shifted. They were not lovers, not yet, but the wall between them had thinned. They had shared more than a home. They had shared fears, burdens, and the simple act of standing watch over one another. In the weeks that followed, their partnership deepened in unexpected ways. Jameson began sitting in on Clara's lessons, showing the children how to track deer along the riverbank, how to recognize healing herbs, how the land itself held stories worth remembering. Clara, in turn, brought order to his business affairs. She helped with correspondence, kept ledgers balanced, and organized ranch accounts with a precision Jameson had never managed on his own. Life at Ironwood Ranch began to feel like more than survival. It began to feel like building. When they rode into Red Hawk for church one Sunday, whispers trailed them like smoke. Folks turned in the pews, some wide-eyed with surprise, others frowning with disapproval. Clara held her chin high, her gloved hand steady on Jameson's arm. The murmurs quieted as the service began. Afterward, people lingered, watching, and slowly, cautious acceptance began to take root. Neighbors who had long avoided Jameson now found reason to nod or greet him. Children who once ran at the sight of him now smiled shyly, remembering his lessons about tracks and herbs. Through Clara's eyes, the town began to see him differently. But Fletcher Kane was not swayed by shifting opinions. If anything, he grew more ruthless. Word reached them that his men spread rumors in saloons, that bribes found their way into the pockets of county officials. He tightened his grip on the mining syndicate, boasting that Ironwood's water would be his come spring. One evening, Clara found Jameson on the porch, staring out at the fading light over the hills. The air smelled faintly of smoke still, though the pastures had begun to green again. "He won't stop," Jameson muttered, almost to himself. "Fire didn't break us. He'll try something else." Clara stepped beside him, slipping her hand into his. The gesture felt natural now, unforced. "Then we face it together. He isn't just fighting you anymore, Jameson. He's fighting both of us." His gaze turned toward her then, and, for once, there was no wall, no guarded mask, only quiet recognition and the beginning of trust that ran deeper than either of them had expected when they stood in that parlor and said their vows. In Red Hawk, tongues still wagged. Some whispered that Clara Whitmore had been foolish to bind herself to a man like Jameson Cross. Others insisted she had tamed him, though those closest knew better. She hadn't changed him. She had simply stood beside him, and in doing so, revealed what had been there all along. As the weeks stretched into months, Ironwood Ranch began to breathe again, scarred but standing strong. Yet the shadow of Cain hung heavy. He had tested them with fire. Clara feared what storm he would send next. And, though she did not yet know it, the true battle for Ironwood and for the bond she and Jameson were building was only just beginning. Fletcher Kane's schemes had grown more brazen, his plan clear make life at Ironwood Ranch so unbearable that Jameson would be forced to sell. But Clara would not allow it. One evening, as the two sat across the dining table, Jameson confessed his fears. "Kane wants me cornered," he muttered. "He'll make managing the ranch harder with every turn until the easier path is to give up." Clara set her fork down, her voice steady. "Then he underestimates us. We're stronger than he believes." For the first time in days, Jameson's hard features softened into a genuine smile. "You've turned into quite the rancher's wife, Clara Whitmore." Her lips curved in amusement. "Is that a complaint? Far from it," he replied. That smile transformed his face, stripping away years of sorrow. "When I proposed our arrangement, I expected a business partner, someone to stand beside me against Cain. I didn't expect this." She tilted her head, intrigued. "This a friend," he said simply. "Someone who makes this house feel like a home again." Her next words slipped out before she could stop them. "And is that all I am? A friend?" His eyes darkened with unspoken emotion. "You know you're more than that, but I won't push for what you're not ready to give. And if I am ready," her voice was barely above a whisper. Jameson studied her face, searching for the truth there. She answered him not with words, but with action, leaning across the table to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, testing, then deepened as he cupped her face with unexpected tenderness. When they drew apart, breathless, his eyes shone with warmth. "I've wanted to do that since the harvest fair," he admitted. Clara laughed softly. "And I've wanted you to since that night you walked me home." Their bond grew in ways neither had foreseen. They still kept to separate rooms, Jameson insisting she feel no pressure. Yet their evenings together stretched long into the night conversations laced with shared memories, whispered dreams, and stolen kisses that left them both trembling. The fragile peace shattered one cold December morning. Clara awoke to the sound of horses in the yard. Peering from her window, she saw Sheriff Elias Boone dismount, his expression grim. She dressed quickly and hurried to the study, where Jameson and the sheriff already spoke in hushed tones. "You can't ignore this, Jameson," Boone said, his voice carrying the weight of the law. "The whole town's talking." Clara stepped inside. "What's happened?" Jameson looked troubled. "Cain has filed formal charges, claims I've been stealing water from company property." "That's absurd," she exclaimed. "The Rio Verde runs straight through Ironwood. The dispute," Boone explained carefully, "comes from the Northern Fork. Cain has produced a survey that places it on mining company land." Jameson's voice cut sharp. "A forgery. I have the original deeds and surveys from when I bought this land. The boundary is clear." Boone sighed. "Cain's got the county commissioner in his pocket, and the judge who'll hear the case owes the mining company his campaign." Clara folded her arms. "So the law won't help us." "I'm saying tread carefully," Boone warned. "Cain's playing a dangerous game. He won't stop at the courts." After the sheriff left, Jameson's frustration boiled over. He paced the floor like a caged panther. If the court rules his way, he gets the water rights. If I fight outside the law, I become the outlaw he paints me to be. "There must be another way," Clara urged. "Something we haven't thought of." Jameson froze mid-stride, a spark in his eyes. "The investors. What about them? They're Eastern men, businessmen. They value reputation as much as profit. If they knew what kind of man Cain truly is, we gather testimonies." Clara finished for him, letters from ranchers and townsfolk who've suffered under him. Jameson's eyes lit with resolve. "Better yet, bring them here. Let them see with their own eyes. through contacts in Denver. Jameson arranged for several investors to visit Red Hawk under the guise of reviewing the mine's progress. Clara collected sworn statements from ranchers whose fences had been cut, from shopkeepers bullied into silence, from families burned out of their homes. When word reached Kane, his fury was barely contained. "Meetin' Jameson in town," he sneered. "You think Eastern money cares for your sob stories? They care about profit." "Then they should know how you intend to deliver it," Jameson replied evenly, his voice carrying across the street, "through intimidation, forgery, and arson." Kane's eyes narrowed to slits. "You'll regret this, you and that pretty wife of yours." Jameson's voice turned cold as steel. "Touch her, and there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in." By the time Jameson returned to Ironwood, 3 versions of the confrontation were already circling town. "People say you threatened to kill him," Clara told him over supper. "People exaggerate," Jameson said dryly, though a dangerous glint flickered in his gaze. "I stated facts." She reached across the table, grasping his hand. "Promise me you'll try the legal way first. He's baiting you. Jameson. Don't give him what he wants." He squeezed her hand. "I promise to try." The night the investors arrived, Red Hawk shined brighter than it had in months. The council arranged a dinner at the hotel, inviting prominent citizens. Clara wore a new green dress stitched by Nora Ellis, and Jameson donned a black suit, collar high and sleeves long to shield what he still could not share. "You look beautiful," he murmured as he helped her into the buggy. "And you, very handsome," she answered, her smile genuine. The dinner was tense. Cain sat smugly with the investors, 3 serious men from New York and Boston. Jameson and Clara were placed with Sheriff Boone, Mayor Alden Collins, and several ranchers. Talk soon shifted to the mine's future. "Water access is our main concern," Mr. Harrington said. "Cain assures us the matter is near resolved." "Legal disputes grow complicated when one side forges documents," Jameson said mildly. Kane's face flushed. "That's a grave accusation. One I can prove," Jameson replied evenly. Clara leaned forward, her voice calm. "Gentlemen, perhaps you should visit Ironwood tomorrow. See the land and the river yourselves." Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "That seems fair. We've seen the mine. We should see the ranch as well." Kane could hardly refuse. "Of course," he said through clenched teeth. The following day, the investors arrived at Ironwood. Jameson guided them across the ranch, showing how the Rio Verde sustained cattle, crops, and every family downstream. He presented original deeds and maps, exposing the flaws in Kane's claims. "If the river is diverted," he explained, "not only Ironwood, but the valley itself will wither." Mr. Harrington looked uneasy. "Kane told us the diversion would cause little harm." "He lied," Jameson said bluntly. Just then, Thomas Grady galloped up, dust rising from his horse. "Boss, you'd best come quick." They rode hard to the north pasture and found Kane's men driving stakes into Ironwood soil. Jameson dismounted, fury simmering beneath his calm. "What do you think you're doing?" Kane smirked. "Marking the boundary. According to the lawful survey, this is trespass and you know it," Jameson growled. The investors exchanged troubled glances. Harrington began. "Mr. Kane, perhaps." But Kane only smiled wider, his trap nearly sprung. "It's exactly the right time." Fletcher Kane snapped, his voice sharp as a whip crack. "Blackwood has been squatting on company land for years. It ends here and now." One of his hired men strode toward the riverbank carrying surveying instruments, clearly intending to lay claim. Before he could take a proper measure, several of the Broken Spur Ranch hands stepped in, their faces grim, their hands hovering near their gun belts. The air was tight with tension, like dry grass waiting for a spark. "Stop this madness," Penelope Blackwood said firmly, stepping between the two groups. Her voice carried steady authority. "There are legal avenues for boundary disputes. This is not the way." Kane's expression twisted with contempt. "Stay out of it, Mrs. Blackwood. Unless you'd like to join your husband when we drive him off this land, that is enough, Mr." Harrington barked, his patience breaking. He turned to Kane, his voice filled with disgust. "You assured us this was merely a water rights discussion. You said nothing about disputed boundaries or threats of eviction." Kane's lip curled. "Business requires decisive action. Hesitation is weakness." "Not our business," said Mr. Whitaker coldly. "Western Mining Company does not operate by intimidation. If this is your method, it explains the resistance we've faced from every rancher in the valley." The argument might have raged further, but a sudden shout broke through. Fire. The south barn, all heads whipped toward the plume of black smoke rising against the horizon. Men leapt to their horses, panic cutting through the confrontation. Amid the confusion, no one saw the matchbox. Kane's man slipped into his pocket. No one except Penelope. "It was them," she said urgently, grabbing Zachary's arm. "I saw one of Kane's men with matches." Zachary's storm-gray eyes fixed on the guilty man, then flicked to Kane, whose smirk betrayed the truth. His voice dropped to a deadly quiet. "You set fire to my property. With my wife and guests here." The investors froze, horror plain on their faces. "Mr. Kane, explain yourself," Harrington demanded. Kane shrugged with a hollow laugh. "Accidents happen. Old barns are tinder boxes." It was the worst thing he could have said. Zachary's hand shot out like lightning, grabbing Kane by the collar and hauling him nearly off the ground. His voice was a low growl. "You're playing with fire in more ways than one, and you don't know the first thing about the man you've provoked." "Zachary," Penelope urged, tugging at his arm. "The barn." With visible effort, he released Kane, turning his focus to the blaze. "Paul, take 10 men to the barn. The rest of you escort our guests back to the house safely." As the investors were led away, silence replaced their earlier arrogance. At the ranch house, Penelope poured coffee, her hands steady though her heart still raced. She laid a carefully kept ledger on the table before Harrington and Whitaker. "These are records of every act Kane has orchestrated: cut fences, scattered herds, threatened hands, the fire in the north pasture last month, and now this." Harrington's jaw tightened. "This is not how Western Mining conducts business. We invest in industry, not lawlessness." "Then perhaps it's time you reconsider your local management," Penelope said evenly. The investors exchanged meaningful glances. Whitaker nodded. "I believe we've seen enough." By the time Zachary returned, streaked with soot but relieved that the fire was contained, Harrington rose to meet him. "Mr. Blackwood, on behalf of our investment group, I extend our apologies. Kane's methods are not sanctioned. He is removed from his post effective immediately." "Removed?" Zachary echoed, stunned. "We've summoned the vice president from Denver. He'll arrive within the week to ensure future dealings respect both ranchers and the river." Harrington cast a glance toward Penelope. "Your wife has been most persuasive. When the investors departed, promising a deal with Cain, Zachary turned to Penelope, wonder in his eyes. How did you manage that? She smiled faintly. I simply showed them the truth, and perhaps appealed to the humanity they keep buried under ledgers and contracts. You're remarkable, he said, drawing her into his arms. I thought this day would end in bloodshed. Instead, you found peace. Not entirely peaceful, she murmured, brushing soot from his cheek. We still lost a barn, a small price for what we gained. His kiss silenced any further protest, leaving no doubt of his devotion. That night, Penelope went to Zachary not to chase away nightmares, but as a wife seeking her husband. His scarred hands were gentle, as if afraid she might break. When he hesitated to bear himself fully, she did it for him, pressing tender kisses to each mark until he no longer flinched. Their union was tender yet fierce, a culmination of months of trust built on respect and shared trials. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Zachary whispered into her hair, I love you. I think I always have since the day you looked at me without fear. And I love you, she replied softly, not despite your scars, but because they are part of you, the man I chose, the man I love. By morning, word spread, Cain had been escorted away to Denver. His replacement, a fair-minded man named Harrison, opened talks that led to a lasting agreement between the mine and the ranchers. Spring brought renewal. The town school was rebuilt, larger and better, thanks to a donation from the Blackwoods. Penelope split her time between the schoolhouse and ranch lessons. Zachary began walking proudly through town at her side, his presence no longer feared but respected. Their first wedding anniversary came with a gathering at the Broken Spur friends, ranchers, and townsfolk celebrating the couple once considered an odd match. Zachary, watching Penelope laugh with Abigail Winters, marveled at the change in his life from isolation to community, from emptiness to love. That night, Penelope placed his hand upon her stomach. There's someone you should meet, she whispered, though it'll be about 7 months before introductions. Zachary's breath caught. You're certain, Doctor? Mason confirmed it. He pulled her close, his voice thick. I never thought I'd have this again, a family. You've given me back everything I thought was gone forever. In September 1880, Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood entered the world with her mother's golden hair and her father's gray eyes. Zachary held her with hands that no longer trembled, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life. Years passed. James followed in 1882, Rebecca in 1884. The school Penelope founded gained renown, and Zachary became a voice for veterans, guiding others toward healing. Evenings often found the Blackwoods on the porch, children asleep inside, the Arizona sky painted in fire and gold. Sometimes, with no music but the beating of their hearts, they danced slowly in the parlor. You ever regret it? Zachary asked once, holding her close, marrying a man you barely knew? Penelope smiled, tracing the scar along his face. I didn't marry a stranger. I married a hero hiding behind a fearsome reputation. And I've never regretted it for a moment. Beneath the vast Arizona sky, the broken spur stood as proof that love could heal the deepest wounds. Zachary's scars, once hidden, had become emblems of survival, a testament that even through fire, love endures. As we grow older, we come to understand that scars, whether seen or unseen, are not signs of weakness, but of survival. Zachary and Penelope's story reminds us that love, patience, and trust can heal wounds that time alone cannot. Many of us, in our later years, carry memories of hardship, mistakes, or losses we wish had never happened. Yet, just as Zachary's scars became symbols of resilience rather than shame, our own trials can shape the wisdom we pass on to our families. The story teaches us that acceptance is one of the greatest gifts we can offer another person and ourselves. True companionship is not built on perfection, but on seeing the whole of someone, flaws included, and choosing to walk beside them anyway. For those in their 60s and beyond, it is a gentle reminder it is never too late to forgive, to open our hearts, and to create joy out of the years ahead. Life's beauty is not in the absence of pain, but in the courage to keep loving despite it. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing stories of courage, love, and hope to life.